mother who got up in the morning for her children, dropped them off at school, and went to work. That same mother was found hanging in her own garage that evening. But this wasn't suicide. It was a carefully planned murder, carried out with such precision that at first glance it looked like suicide. But the killer made one mistake, and that mistake would expose this entire story. Hello everyone, I'm Adam, and you're watching Who Was, where we bring you the world's most shocking, painful, and true crime cases. Today's story comes from Phillip Island, Australia, a peaceful island near Melbourne, where everything seemed normal on the surface, but inside one house, a horrifying game had been playing out for years. This is the story of Samantha Fraser, a talented psychotherapist, a loving mother, and a woman who wanted to start her life over. But her past wouldn't let go of her. If this is your first time on our channel, please subscribe and don't forget to hit the bell icon because more astonishing stories like this are coming. Let's begin this painful story. Adrian Basham was born in Australia in 1973. His father, James Basham, was a police officer, and on the surface, the household had an atmosphere of order and discipline. There was nothing in Adrian's childhood record that would have made anyone suspect what this child would grow up to become. But those who later tried to understand this case say that the anger and uncontrolled emotions inside Adrian likely began developing in childhood itself. Growing up in a police officer's household doesn't necessarily mean a child also learns to respect the law. Sometimes, in homes like this, there's a different kind of control and discipline, one that looks orderly from the outside, but on the inside, the child only learns that power and control are everything. Something similar seems to be true in Adrian's case, as we'll see later in his married life. The most interesting and disturbing part is that when Adrian murdered his wife, his own father, James Basham, himself a former police officer, instead of condemning his son, taught him how to speak, how to behave, so that the sentence would be lighter or he could get away with it. This is an aspect of the whole story that makes everyone stop and think. Why would a father try to cover up his own son's crime? From the start, there was a kind of harshness and aggression in Adrian's personality. Those who knew him say he was very short-tempered even in conversation, and his anger would go out of control over the smallest things. These things seem normal at the time, as long as no one takes them seriously, but later, these very things become the biggest warning signs. As we move towards Samantha's story, we'll see how two people with such different personalities met and how their lives changed forever. But before that, it's important to understand Samantha well, too, because her story isn't just the story of a victim, but of a woman who spent her entire life helping others. If Adrian's childhood was so normal, then where did all this cruelty inside him come from? This question will keep troubling us throughout the story, and perhaps the answer isn't as simple as we think. Now, let's meet Samantha Fraser, a girl from a completely different world whose life story will move you. Samantha Fraser was born in the summer of 1980 in a suburb of Melbourne. Her parents, Janine and Travis Fraser, were loving, hard-working people. Samantha was their only daughter, and they did everything they could to make sure she got the best education and recognized her talents. This was a home with no shortage of love, respect, and support. During her school years, Samantha was an excellent student. Her academic record was admirable, and alongside that, she was also active in sports. She won several awards through her hard work. She was someone who wanted to excel at everything, and the people around her always saw her as a girl with a bright future ahead. For university, Samantha chose to study psychology, and this choice was perhaps a strange twist of fate, because later on, the very knowledge she learned to help others couldn't save her own life. She completed her degree with a red diploma, considered a major achievement in Australia. Alongside her studies, Samantha also took part in acrobatics, gymnastics, and dancing, and led the cheerleading team. She was someone full of energy, love, and life. After graduating, she began working as a psychotherapist at a major medical institution, where she quickly earned the trust of her colleagues and patients. For Samantha, this wasn't just a job, it was a calling. She genuinely loved her work, and helping others was in her nature. Remember this, because later we'll see the kind of cruelty this same kind and understanding woman had to endure, and how she tried to carry on with patience and hope. Those who knew Samantha remember her as a woman who always smiled, who listened to others' problems, and who found a way through even the most difficult situations. But fate had written a test for her that she never could have imagined. Now it's time for these two different worlds to meet. When Samantha and Adrian's lives became intertwined, no one had any idea where this path would lead. Samantha and Adrian met in late 2005. At first, their relationship was just friendship, but it soon turned into love. Those who knew them closely couldn't understand how two people with such different personalities were drawn to each other. Samantha was kind, cheerful, and sociable, always finding a way to make peace. Adrian was the complete opposite, harsh, rude, and short-tempered. Despite this difference, the two married about a year and a half after meeting. The new couple bought a house in Cowes, Phillip Island, not far from Samantha's parents' home. Adrian soon got a job at a large mining company, which required him to travel frequently for business. This was the reason the marriage held together in the early years, because Adrian was rarely home. But whenever Adrian was home, his true colors showed. He had become a domestic tyrant who wanted to control everything. It wasn't enough for him that Samantha simply obeyed him. He wanted everything in the house in perfect order. How the books were arranged on the shelf, where the toiletries were in the bathroom. His anger would spiral out of control even over the smallest things. Being a psychologist, Samantha knew how to handle conflicts. She hoped that with time, Adrian would change, would calm down. But this was only a dream. 3 children were born from the marriage, 2 daughters, Jemima and April, and a son, Rex. But the birth of the children didn't change Adrian's temperament at all. Even a kind and understanding woman becomes weak in the face of this kind of abuse when she's also worried about her children. Samantha probably thought that if she was patient, if she tried to reason with Adrian, things would get better. But in reality, this was a silence that would prove even more dangerous later on. But in 2014, something happened that would forever change the course of this story, when Adrian's anger turned physically violent for the first time. In 2014, a family argument escalated so much that Adrian raised his hand against Samantha. But Samantha stayed silent. She didn't report it to police, didn't tell anyone about it. She probably thought it was just a mistake, a moment of anger, and that it wouldn't happen again. This silence is common among many victims of domestic violence, a mix of shame, fear, and hope that keeps them quiet. But the very next year, the same story repeated itself. Adrian hit Samantha again. This time, Samantha decided enough is enough. Her husband's anger, his temper, and his constant need to control everything were breaking her down inside. She formally filed a police report that her husband was hitting her and moved with the children to her parents' house. In the spring of 2017, the two divorced. By court order, the house went to Samantha and the children, and they were able to live there again. But Adrian had no intention of leaving his ex-wife alone. He kept following her, kept turning her life into hell. Samantha never felt safe. She was always afraid for her life and her children's lives. Samantha obtained a protection order from the court to keep Adrian away from her, but this did nothing to stop Basham. According to one of his friends, Adrian had sworn that he would take everything from Samantha, from the house to the children, and had also threatened to physically harm her. Shortly before the murder, he told his friend again that Samantha would have to pay for it. His friend also sensed the terrifying rage on Adrian's face at the time, but he didn't take it seriously until he heard about Samantha's death. Living in fear and constant anxiety, Samantha tried to secure her home. She had an alarm system installed, put bars on the windows, and set up surveillance cameras outside the house. She feared Adrian could break into her home at any time and harm her or her children. But as time passed, Samantha began to feel that Adrian had perhaps calmed down, and she began to hope for a new, happier future. About a year after the divorce, Samantha began to feel that Adrian had calmed down a bit. He wasn't showing up around her as often as before, which gave Samantha a false sense of safety. Life started feeling a little more normal, and Samantha took steps toward reclaiming her real life. Samantha began a new relationship with a man named Wayne, whom she'd fallen in love with. Life was starting to feel bright again, and Samantha had begun dreaming of her future once more. This was a time when, after so much suffering, this woman had started feeling happiness again. On July 22, 2018, Samantha celebrated her 38th birthday with her close friends and Wayne. Those who were with her that day say she looked very happy and at peace. A few days earlier, Wayne had proposed to her, and after the wedding, the two were planning to go on a long vacation so they could leave the pain of the past behind and start a new journey. This moment was so beautiful that no one could have imagined that within just a few days, Samantha's life would end this way. A woman who had endured so much pain, who had raised her children alone, who had spent her life helping others, was finally taking steps toward her own happiness. But fate had something else in mind. Samantha was due to appear in court against Adrian in a domestic violence case within a few weeks, and she feared Adrian might take revenge because of this lawsuit. This fear was eating away at her inside, but she didn't let it defeat her happiness. But the day that was meant to be the start of a new journey for Samantha turned out to be the last day of her life. The next morning, Samantha dropped her children off at school and headed to work herself. On the way, she got a call from an acquaintance who warned her that Adrian had been seen near her house. Hearing this news worried Samantha, but she decided she wouldn't panic. She'd just be a little more careful. She shared what was on her mind with her closest friend over the phone, and that friend reassured her, promising everything would be fine. This was the last conversation of Samantha's life that anyone can confirm she was alive for. After that call, Samantha was never seen alive again. That day, when Samantha didn't arrive at school to pick up her children, the teacher grew worried. The teacher already knew about the difficult situation at Samantha's home, so she immediately called the police. Police rushed to the house to check on everything. At first, it seemed like maybe Samantha just hadn't come home yet. But when officers checked the garage attached to the house, they were faced with a horrifying scene. The body of 38-year-old Samantha was found hanging from the garage door. On the surface, it looked like suicide, but the condition of her body told a very different story. Samantha's body looked as if it had been run over by a truck, wounds everywhere. Her hair was wet and disheveled around her face. The clothes she'd worn leaving the house had been changed, and she wasn't wearing shoes. All of this was evidence that someone else had also been present in that garage and had tried to make it look like a suicide. But as carefully as this had been planned, the killer had also left behind mistakes, and those very mistakes would expose the lie. When forensic investigators examined the crime scene closely, many things came to light that completely contradicted the suicide theory. A fallen stepladder lay in the garage, but the rope was long enough that Samantha's feet touched the ground, which didn't match a suicide in any way. There were severe bruises under Samantha's eye and on her temple, and wounds and marks covered her entire body. Forensic examination revealed she had also suffered a severe blow to the head, which meant she was either unconscious or already dead by the time she was hung. Blood and skin particles were found under her fingernails, evidence that Samantha had fought back against her killer, tried to scratch him. There were blood spatter marks on the garage floor, walls, and car, which had been an attempt at cleaning but hadn't been fully erased. Blood traces were also found on the rope used to hang Samantha. All of this pointed to one thing. This was a deliberate, planned murder that had been made to look like a suicide. That same evening, Adrian Basham arrived at his father James's house on his motorcycle. He looked distressed, and there were fresh scratch marks on his face. When his father asked, he said he'd been riding without a helmet and his face got scratched by tree branches. Then he began cleaning his motorcycle with wet wipes, saying he was removing bugs. James Basham, himself a former police officer, immediately sensed something was wrong. The next day, when detectives came asking questions about Adrian and told James that Adrian was the #1 suspect in his ex-wife's murder case, everything became clear to James. At first, he lied and said he hadn't seen his son, but then he coached his son on how to answer questions, how to behave, so he could avoid punishment, or at least reduce it. As the investigation progressed, every new piece of evidence pointed further toward Adrian, and soon he had nowhere left to hide. When Adrian was taken to the police station, he initially refused to cooperate with the investigation at all. He wasn't admitting to the crime, but stayed silent, ignoring the questions. But the evidence gathered was so strong that it couldn't be denied. The fresh scratch marks on Adrian's face didn't escape investigators' notice. It was suspected that Samantha had scratched Adrian while trying to save her life, and the blood and skin particles found under her fingernails confirmed this. Traces of Adrian's sweat were also found on the rope, directly linking him to the crime. When Adrian's motorcycle was examined, washed-off traces of Samantha's blood were also found on it. A blood-stained blouse was also found in a trash bin outside his father's house. Adrian had likely tried to dispose of this piece of evidence, but ran out of time. The surveillance cameras Samantha had installed outside her house captured a figure hurrying away from the crime scene. His face was covered by a hoodie and cap, but there was no doubt it was Adrian. The investigation team pieced together the entire timeline of the murder. While no one was home, Adrian broke the garage lock and got in, then waited for hours for Samantha to return. When Samantha unknowingly drove her car into the garage, Adrian attacked her before she could even get out of the car. Samantha fought back fiercely, as the scratch marks on the killer's face show, but the strength wasn't equal. He beat Samantha until she was unconscious, then, to erase his traces, removed her blood-soaked blouse and put a black t-shirt found in the house on her instead, and poured water over her blonde hair to wash out the blood. After this, Adrian put a rope around his ex-wife's neck and hung her from the garage door, and to make it convincing, knocked the stepladder to the ground, but forgot to account for the length of the rope. He tried to clean up the bloodstains, but small splatters escaped his notice and were present everywhere. Now that the evidence stood against Adrian like a mountain, let's see how he presented his defense and what verdict the court delivered on this brutal crime. When Adrian realized that denial or silence would no longer work because all the evidence pointed toward him, he changed his story. Basham said he really had gone to his ex-wife's house that day, but only to talk, to convince her to withdraw the domestic violence lawsuit. According to him, the conversation didn't go well, and a physical altercation broke out. But he claimed that when he left, Frazier was alive and conscious. His lawyers argued that their client was only guilty of assault, and that according to him, Samantha had taken her own life. But this argument held no weight with those who knew Samantha. Her relatives said Samantha would never do such a thing. She would never leave her children alone, especially when she was about to remarry and had made such beautiful plans for her life. The murder trial didn't happen until late 2022. During the court hearings, Samantha and Adrian's older children were also present, and they condemned their father and appealed for an appropriate sentence. The youngest son wasn't present in court. He was naturally spared this trauma, as the child was deeply afraid of his father. The defense tried to argue that Adrian committed this crime in a sudden state of affect rather than in a premeditated way. But this argument didn't work either, because Adrian had waited for hours for his victim, had prepared materials for the crime in advance, and later tried to hide the evidence, all of which confirmed that this was a deliberate, premeditated murder. The court's final verdict came in February 2023. Adrian Basham was found guilty of a merciless, premeditated murder and was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole for at least the next 30 years. Samantha's parents, Janine and Travis Frazier, became the guardians of her and Samantha's children, so the children could grow up in a loving and safe environment. This story ends with a court's verdict, but the lessons hidden behind it are ones we should always remember. Samantha Frazier's story teaches us that violence can never truly hide its real face. No matter how close someone is to us, if we see the first signs of cruelty in them, we shouldn't ignore them. Samantha spent her whole life helping others, endured for the sake of her children, and finally took steps toward her own happiness. But fate never gave her that chance. This story also teaches us that domestic violence of any kind cannot be fixed by staying silent about it. Instead, it should be spoken about immediately, and help should be sought. Samantha's courage, her children's strength, and her parents' love are a ray of hope in this sorrowful story.
Applause has erupted in the Supreme Court as a killer was sentenced to life in prison for the cold-blooded murder of his ex-wife, Samantha Fraser. Adrian Basham's crimes were described as heinous, savage, and without remorse. Adam Hegarty reports.
He rushed into court shackled. Then killer Adrian Basham left to the sounds of gasps and applause from the exhausted family and friends of slain Phillip Island mum, Samantha Fraser.
Everyone, this was the painful but true story of Samantha Fraser. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to this channel, Who Was, and hit the bell icon so you don't miss our next video. Please share your thoughts in the comments section, and if you'd like to hear about another crime case, let us know. I'm Adam, and I'll see you with the next astonishing story.